Welcome to In-Silico Trials Real Impact, the In-Silico UK podcast that's revolutionizing the way we think about medical innovation. I'm Professor Alejandro Frangi from the University of Manchester, and I'll be your guide through this fascinating world of in-silico technologies. In each episode, we'll dive into cutting-edge research and groundbreaking news that are shaping the future of medical product development and regulation. From computational modeling to simulated clinical trials, we are exploring how digital approaches are transforming healthcare, making it safer, more efficient, more equitable, and incredibly precise. So, whether you're a researcher, regulator, a member of the public, or a patient representative, or simply curious about the future of medicine, tune in as we unravel the complex world of in-silico methods and their real-world impact. Get ready to discover how computer-simulated trials are leading to very real breakthroughs in patient care. In-Silico Trials, Real Impact, where algorithms and data are saving lives. Let's begin.
You know how it is, you see a headline about some new medical study, maybe a new health guideline, and it feels like just a huge amount of information coming at you. How do you cut through the noise?
Yeah, what actually matters. What should you believe?
Exactly. And that's what we're getting into today. We want to explore how you can become, genuinely well-informed without getting completely overwhelmed.
Absolutely. We're diving into evidence-based medicine, EBM as it's known, and this really interesting idea called evidential pluralism.
Okay.
Think of this as a bit of a shortcut to understanding why some health claims really stick,
right,
and others, well, maybe not so much. Our goal today is to unpack these concepts.
And especially focus on something called mechanistic evidence.
Precisely. We want to understand what that is, why it's so crucial, and how understanding it helps you make better sense of all that health information out there.
Okay, so evidence-based medicine, EBM, when people hear that, I think they often jump straight to the big clinical studies.
Right, the randomized controlled trials, RCTs, those are, fundamental. They look at large groups, compare a treatment to a placebo or another treatment, and see if there's a statistical link, a correlation between the intervention and the outcome.
So does it work? That's the core question they try to answer by looking for these associations.
And that's, a perfectly good description of how EBM is often practiced. But this idea, evidential pluralism, it suggests we need a little more.
More than just the correlation.
Yeah. It argues that just finding that link, that correlation, isn't always quite enough to confidently say A causes B, especially in complex fields like medicine.
Sure.
To really sort of establish that causal claim, the Russo and Williamson thesis suggests you normally need two things. A solid correlation, yes, but also
the how.
Exactly. A plausible underlying mechanism that can actually explain how A leads to B.
Okay, let's dig into that a bit. Why is relying only on correlations potentially, risky? They get reported all the time.
They do. But think about it. Just because two things happen together, it doesn't automatically mean one caused the other, does it?
Right. The classic example is ice cream sales and drowning incidents going up in summer. One doesn't cause the other.
Exactly. There could be confounding factors like summer heat in that case.
Yeah.
Or it could just be chance, pure coincidence in the data you happen to collect.
Or maybe how the study was designed. Fishing for results.
That too. Our sources list a whole bunch of non-causal reasons for correlations. Chance, fishing, simple trends over time where two unrelated things are increasing, even things like semantic or logical links, or just basic physics.
Okay, lots of pitfalls. So how does understanding the mechanism, the how, help us avoid falling into those traps?
Well, the mechanism is the actual process, right? One source defines it as this complex setup of entities and activities working together to reliably produce an outcome.
Like the biological steps inside the body.
Precisely. Or it could be social factors or how a medical device works. If we could actually map out that step-by-step process, how, say, a drug interacts with cells to reduce inflammation, it gives us a much stronger reason to believe the correlation we saw in the trial is real causation, not just noise.
Got it. Is there a good example where this focus on mechanism really changed the interpretation of some correlation data?
Oh, definitely. The IRC example looking into mobile phones and cancer is a good one mentioned in the readings. Some early epidemiological studies hinted at a possible correlation, a statistical link between heavy use and certain brain tumors.
Okay, I remember hearing about that.
But when scientists trying to figure out is there a plausible biological mechanism by which the radio frequency energy from phones could actually damage DNA or promote tumor growth in a way we understand?
They couldn't find a strong one.
The evidence for a convincing mechanism was considered weak. There wasn't a clear, accepted biological story. And because that how was missing or unclear, there was, and still is, a lot more uncertainty about whether the correlation seen in some studies points to actual causation. The lack of a strong mechanism weakened the causal claim, even with some correlation data.
That makes perfect sense. The numbers suggested something, but the biology didn't really back it up strongly. Okay, so this brings us to this term EBM plus. You mentioned it earlier. What's the PLM plus adding?
Right, EBM plus OP. You can think of it as an enhanced version of standard EBM. The plus OP plus basically stands for the explicit integration and evaluation of this mechanistic evidence alongside the correlation evidence from things like RCTs.
So it's making the how an official part of the evaluation process.
Exactly. It's saying, look, the correlation data is vital, but let's also systematically look at the evidence for the underlying mechanism to get a fuller, more robust picture. The mechanism is the EBM plus add.
So EBM plus is basically putting evidential pluralism into medical practice, saying we need both the association and a plausible supported explanation.
You've got it.
Yeah.
And this isn't just about figuring out if a treatment works in the first place, its efficacy. Understanding the mechanism is also super important for something called external validity.
External validity. That's about whether results from a study group apply to other people, right? Like if it worked in the trial participants, will it work for me or for a different population group?
Precisely. And knowing the mechanism helps assess that. The key questions become, 1, is the mechanism, the way the treatment works, likely to be similar in the new population, the target population?
Okay.
And 2, are there other things going on in that new population, maybe different biology or environmental factors, that could interfere with or counteract that mechanism, even if it's potentially there?
Can you give an example of that, where mechanism differences matter for external validity?
Sure. Think about ACE inhibitors, common blood pressure medications. They work by targeting a specific biological pathway, the renin-angiotensin system.
Right.
Now, evidence suggests that individuals of African Caribbean descent, for instance, often have, on average, lower activity in this specific renin system compared to other groups.
Okay.
So because the drug's mechanism directly involves that system, if the system is naturally less active in a particular group, the drug might not have the same degree of effectiveness. Understanding that mechanistic difference helps explain variations in treatment response across populations.
Wow. Okay. So the mechanism isn't just academic. It has real practical implications for who benefits from a treatment. It helps assess efficacy and external validity.
Absolutely crucial for both.
So let's get into brass tacks there. What counts as mechanistic evidence? What kind of studies or data are we talking about here?
Good question. So remember the definition of a mechanism, the system of parts and activities producing an outcome. Mechanistic evidence comes from studies that shed light on those parts and activities. They're investigating the how.
Not just the link between the start, cause, and the end effect.
Exactly. They're looking inside that process. And this evidence can come from a lot of different places.
Like what?
Our sources list quite a few. You've got lab studies like in vitro experiments on cells or tissues, biomedical imaging, MRI, CT scans that let us see processes happening inside the body.
Autopsies.
Autopsies can provide clues, yes. Also, just drawing on established scientific theory, basic biology or chemistry, can be a form of mechanistic evidence. Animal experiments are common. Computer simulations modeling the process.
Okay.
And interestingly, even clinical studies can contribute mechanistic evidence if they're designed to measure intermediate steps in the causal pathway. Not just the final outcome, but something happening along the way that's part of the proposed mechanism.
So a standard clinical trial might just measure blood pressure change after taking a drug.
Right. Input and output.
But a study providing mechanistic evidence might also measure, say, the levels of specific enzymes that the drug is supposed to affect.
Exactly. It's looking at those intermediate variables. Our sources distinguish between clinical studies, measuring cause and effect together, and mechanistic studies, investigating the how, but they also mention mixed studies that try to capture both aspects. The key is the focus association versus explanation.
This is clarifying, but it also sounds complex to evaluate. How do you weigh all these different kinds of mechanistic evidence? An in vitro study isn't the same as an animal study or a theoretical argument.
You're right. It's not like just looking at a p-value in an RCT. It requires judgment and a systematic approach. The sources outline some key steps. First, you need to be really clear about the specific mechanistic claim you're assessing.
Like, does a mechanism exist to explain this effect, or is this specific proposed mechanism the right one?
Exactly. Or for external validity, is the mechanism likely to be similar in this other population? You also need to break down the proposed mechanism into its key features or steps, the specific hypotheses you want evidence for.
Okay, define the question and the proposed how. Then what?
Then you gather the evidence. This means formulating focused review questions based on those mechanism hypotheses, doing systematic searches of the literature for relevant studies, lab studies, animal studies, imaging, etc., and then filtering those results to get the useful information.
So it's like conducting a mini systematic review, but focused on the mechanistic aspects.
Sort of, yeah. You're hunting for evidence about the process. And crucially, once you've found potential evidence, you have to assess its quality.
How good were those lab experiments? How relevant was that animal model?
Precisely. You look at the methods used in each mechanistic study, how well it was carried out, how reliable the results seem. Not all mechanistic studies are created equal, just like not all clinical trials are.
Makes sense. Quality matters everywhere. So after gathering and assessing the quality of all these different pieces, the lab work, the imaging, the theory, how do you synthesize it? How do you decide if the overall mechanism claim holds water?
That's the synthesis step. The sources suggest a few ways to think about it. For establishing a mechanism for efficacy, why a treatment works, you might consider it established if you have either. 1. Really high-quality clinical studies showing a strong correlation that you can't easily explain away by bias or chance.
So strong correlation implies some mechanism, even if unspecified.
Kind of. Or 2, you have high-quality mechanistic studies that confirm all the really crucial steps or features of the specific mechanism you proposed.
Okay, 2 paths to establishing it. And when would you say a mechanism is ruled out, or at least less likely?
You'd lean against it if you find high-quality evidence that contradicts crucial parts of the proposed mechanism. Or if the mechanism predicts a certain outcome, but high-quality clinical trials consistently fail to show that outcome. That mismatch casts doubt on the mechanism.
And for external validity, the similarity between populations.
Similar logic. You'd feel confident about external validity if you have good evidence showing the key parts of the mechanism are indeed similar between the study population and the target population. You'd doubt it if you find solid evidence of important differences in those key components.
This provides a much more structured way to think about it than just vaguely saying we need a mechanism.
Right. And there's also this related idea mentioned briefly, negative mechanistic reasoning.
Negative reasoning?
Yeah, it's about arguments against a causal link based on mechanisms. It could be arguing that a proposed mechanism just doesn't make sense, like it violates known physics, or that attempts to find evidence for a plausible mechanism have consistently failed, or even arguing that the mechanism points towards a negative outcome, not a positive one. It's using mechanistic thinking to argue against causation.
Interesting. So you can use mechanisms to build a case for causation or to take it apart.
Exactly. It cuts both ways.
So ultimately, this EBM plus or evidential pluralism approach, it's really about combining the strengths of both types of evidence, isn't it? The correlation and the mechanism.
That's the core message. One source uses the metaphor of reinforced concrete. The correlation is like the steel bars, the mechanism is like the concrete. Together, they make a much stronger structure.
So strong correlation from an RCT is good, but it's much better if backed by a plausible, well-supported mechanism.
Definitely. A strong correlation without a good mechanism might still leave you wondering if it's a fluke or confounding. And a beautiful mechanism on paper doesn't mean much if high-quality trials consistently show the treatment doesn't actually work in practice. You really want both lining up.
And apparently, people are developing ways to formally include this mechanistic assessment in evidence summaries, like adapting grade tables.
That's right. There are efforts to make the evaluation of mechanistic evidence more explicit and systematic within the existing frameworks used to assess medical evidence overall. It's about making it a standard part of the process.
Okay, let's try to summarize the key takeaways from this deep dive. First, evidence-based medicine is increasingly recognizing the need for evidential pluralism.
Right, which means valuing both association evidence, like from RCTs, the does it work, and mechanistic evidence, the how does it work.
And understanding that mechanism is vital not just for confirming efficacy, but also for assessing external validity. Will it work for different people?
Absolutely. The mechanism explains the how and helps us judge if that how applies more broadly.
We also learned that mechanistic evidence comes from diverse sources, lab studies, imaging, theory, animal models, even parts of clinical trials, and there's a systematic process for evaluating it.
Yes, defining the claim, gathering the evidence, assessing study quality, and then synthesizing the findings to judge the status of the mechanism.
And the big picture is that combining strong correlation evidence with strong mechanistic evidence gives us the most robust basis for making causal claims in medicine.
That's the ideal, the reinforced concrete.
So hopefully, for everyone listening, this gives you a richer framework for thinking about medical news and health claims. It's not just about the headline result of one study.
Exactly. It encourages a deeper level of questioning. Okay, they found a link, but why? Is there a plausible explanation? And is that explanation well supported by other kinds of evidence?
So here's a final thought to chew on. How might incorporating this deeper understanding of mechanisms demanding the how, alongside the what, change the way you evaluate health information you come across, or maybe even the health decisions you consider?
It's definitely something to think about. You might start looking for mentions of biological plausibility or mechanistic studies when reading about new findings.
Definitely food for thought. We encourage you to check out the sources if you want to dive even deeper into specific aspects we touched on today, and maybe consider how this idea of needing both correlation and mechanism plays out elsewhere, beyond just medicine.